Mi amigo.
Superb. It's Tuesday, March 28th. This is the what edition what FUD edition of the Crypto Flight Path is this? This is the news of a new virus or a variant of bird flu from China, the government acting illegally against our beloved industry, and more FUD, more fuels to fan the FUD.
Yeah, it's another day,
Say
man.
that.
It's just the FUD cycle continues, right? And it's just another day in crypto. But if you look at the markets, everything's held up pretty well. Bitcoin's sitting at 27,000, Ethereum's at 1,700. In spite of all this, the markets are acting pretty resiliently, and I think that gives the industry. I shared a great meme with you yesterday where they were, attacking. It was a meme of SpongeBob, and they were trying to choke him out. And the look on his face was that he kind of liked it. And I thought that was a
Yeah.
great meme for crypto because we're used to this. Like this is part of the deal. If you're in crypto, you're going to have to face these uncertainties, and this is just part of it. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than we knew we were going to have to face this at some point, right? It's been 12 to 13 years, and now the U.S. government is officially, entering the ring, and they've decided they want to fight. And my position is, I think it's silly. I think they should embrace this technology, and it's okay to have discussions around this stuff. But the way they're doing it seems to be, you know, not necessarily above board, I will say. Uh, but, you know, I think that's why we want to talk about today and why decentralization is so important. Because if you have a centralized entity, these government agencies can attack it, you know, and they will, and that's what's happening now with Binance, Coinbase, all these exchanges, they're being attacked by government agencies, and that's why the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, purposely remained anonymous because he knew this would come, and there's no central point of authority for them to attack.
This reminds me of something that I didn't really think about as a child, or when I did think about as a child, I didn't necessarily understand, but has as an adult, and now looking at looking at the things that benefit us as a society, as free citizens in the free enterprise and the allegedly still free enterprise system, although that's some might beg to differ, but I digress. What I'm trying to communicate here is that I think we have taken for granted as a society, one of the things that helped, or one of the things that has helped us as or through time, is that our cash, like our paper dollars, forget about them being debased. That's not the argument, or that's not the point of the discussion of this thread. The thread is that in a society that uses fiat dollars or cash in our country here, as a medium of exchange, people can transact 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without anybody's permission. Most important, if I take my cash in my hand and I want to go to the grocery store and buy a gallon of milk at 7 a.m. and the grocery store's open at 7 a.m., I can trade my paper dollars for the milk. That transaction gets recorded, but at the store level, but it's a transaction between myself and the grocery store. I get in my car and I drive home, and I can forget about that transaction. I didn't have to log it. It wasn't logged anywhere necessarily, and which isn't really the point. The point that I'm trying to really like illustrate here is that we've taken for granted as a society that being able to transact and buy the things that we want, whether put the legal argument or the judgment aside of whether or not buying the milk was legal or ethical or moral, because there's always going to be some contingent of society that's going to use whatever money that we use to transact, and they're going to do things with it that you or I or someone else may deem as illegal, immoral, or may actually be illegal depending on what the law is. Not the point. What I'm trying to get to is that with dollars paper money is a problem for government enforcement agencies like the FBI or the ATF or your local law enforcement. There's and cash has there's a an aspersion that's cast upon it from from a law and order perspective. And I'll get into the legal side of this. Is that it's really easy for people, or it's really easy for law enforcement agencies to say that we have to get or it's really hard for us to catch criminals because they're transacting in cash. That argument against cash before any of our beloved crypto ever existed has now been rubber stamped and placed on things like Bitcoin that can be transacted in a decentralized fashion without anyone's permission around the world 24/7. So I think the war on Bitcoin or a war on crypto, there are some characteristics of a war on cash, which is why moving to a cashless society should scare. And I'll take a page out of the governing bodies playbooks here, using fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'll cast some FUD on why everyone should be afraid of a cashless society where tracked and all there's a skew to one side of the equation in terms of surveillance power, and where authorities have way too much power, and uh, free peoples are not actually free and able to transact as they see fit in the society that they live in. And that's really what I think is part of what's happening here, is that there's this political pressure and this push to be seen to be attacking decentralized things, because it's the war on cash 2.0, in my opinion. And with Bitcoin being uh, a decentralized global monetary network that no one can stop, and we as individuals can transact in any way that we see fit. Just look at what happened to the Silk Road. Okay, that aside, this idea of a cashless society is something I think is one of the undercurrents in this fight that we find ourselves in. So that was the point I wanted to get across.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the importance of why having a decentralized monetary network is important, because if you don't, right, if you have a centralized cryptocurrency, if it's Fed coin or U.S. coin or whatever they want to try to implement as a CBDC, they can control it, right, and they can limit your purchasing power, and they can at the end of the day, they can actually absolutely control your life. And so, I've got a tweet pulled up here from uh, kanakoa.substack.com, and he brings up the fact that David Sachs, who's a well-known venture capitalist and investor, actually discusses Nick Carter's article that we brought up a couple of weeks ago, talking about Operation Choke Point and the Biden administration's plan to ban crypto. And he brings up the SEC lawsuit against Paxos, SEC target Kraken for staking, Gensler labeled crypto as securities. Uh, let's see, bill proposed on tax miners. NYAG declare ETH as security. SEC blocked Bitcoin ETF. SEC Coinbase Wells notice. And he says, I think it's hard to argue that there isn't a concerted effort now to crack down on crypto by a wide variety of government agencies and authorities, starting with Gensler at the SEC, who seems incredibly hostile to crypto. And this is interesting because you have people that aren't necessarily involved in the crypto industry, bringing this up because it impacts the larger, economy and way forward in the monetary system. I mean, this is a big deal. It's not just crypto related. How they're handling crypto is how they've handled everything else, right? And so that's something, again, when we talk about decentralization, that's why it's important, because if Bitcoin had a CEO, they would be served a Wells notice. They would be under scrutiny from the government, right? They would attack it any way they can. It's really hard to do something with that doesn't have a centralized authority, right? That's the big difference between Bitcoin and a lot of the other crypto projects.
Yeah, it's something that you illuminated in my mind talking about this idea of what happens when there's a CDBC and the effects that it can have on the everyday person's life. Uh, it's not, it's really easy to think that it's no big deal. Where our dollars are already, quote unquote digital, meaning we send money electronically, we transact with credit cards, we never actually touch paper cash anymore. And sure, that's all fine and well and good, but the CDBC thing that I think the average person probably doesn't understand, but I don't know for sure, is is the ability for them, or the ability for CDBC, the unit, the currency unit that is now fully digital. uh, the, it's the the ability for the issuing agency in this case to reach into your bank. I mean, see, I guess the thing I'm trying to like really spit out here is that your cash can already be seized today if there's enough. Um, if Ironically enough, your money in your bank account is protected by a certain amount of red tape. And there were even government, like even the FBI, if they wanted to come and take, let's say there was probable cause, they would have to get a warrant. They would have to do a bunch of other things, and it's a Rube Goldberg machine of pain and suffering for a lot of people to get to your money in your bank account. Now it can happen, and you know, ideally you're not, that would trigger such a thing. Anyway, what I'm trying to get to is that uh, I think the COVID fiasco, I'll call it, I hope, illuminated the terrain in a statistically significant number of minds at how easily things get strange when, and how easily it is for government and or government agencies and people in positions of authority to very quickly start enacting policy and basically making rulings that you can't do things like leave your house. And if you thought the COVID lockdowns and those restrictions were nuts, what do you get a load of CDBCs and the way that if something doesn't line up on somebody else's radar or somebody else's plan that day, and you happen to be on their radar, and they decide that, well, we better be to be safe. We're just following policy. We're just following rules. This person's done something. We don't have any proof. Due process gets thrown out the window, and yank, out comes your money from your bank account even faster than you could. I mean, faster than you can imagine, because they will have direct access to be able to move those funds out of your account into another account, and then the Rube Goldberg machine of pain and suffering is now your life. When you have to now the burden of proof is on you. And if you've ever had to deal with any government agencies like the IRS, the when you get a letter from them and they say that your return was wrong or this other thing was wrong, the burden of proof is not on the IRS or the agency in this case. The burden of proof is on the taxpayer. And let me tell you, that is not where you want to be. So, in my opinion, the I this the CDBC, the dark cloud of CDBC-ness is on the horizon, and I really really hope that well, or here's what I'm most hopeful for. I'm most hopeful for that the federal government and the current administration, they talk about this like it's coming, insofar as they understand that if they do, it's going to light a fire at the state and local level, and ironically enough, could help kick this issue, much like previous presidents have, like with the marijuana legalization thing. If memory serves, it was George W. Bush basically said, "We're not going to make this decision at the federal level. We're going to put it back on the states." And what I'm hoping for is that that's what happens, and that what we've seen with Florida and Texas starts to spread. And there are other states that I can't rattle off right now because I have a little more research to do. But at the state level will start legislating to outright ban CBDCs and create the right moat around our right as a society to use the money that we choose without government oversight and etc. So I'll stop there because I could hammer on about that forever, but I
Yeah,
won't.
and I think it's important to realize that the states give the federal government its powers, right? And that's how this system is. It's not the reverse, right? And you're starting to see
Correct.
that in Texas and Florida. And when we talk about CBDCs, they are going to try this. I mean, they're barreling down the road. I mean, any authoritarian, it loves the idea of a CBDC. There's actually, and I don't know if this is real or not, but there was a call. I guess somebody prank called Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the ECB, and pretended to be Zelensky, and was talking about, basically saying, hey, how people will not like, being controlled. And she basically was saying, she's like, well, in Europe, there's already, if you spend over $1,000 in cash, you're in the gray market. And what they're talking about, and they're going to use the guys. And she explicitly said, you know, in relation to terrorist attack, they want to track everything, and they're going to use terrorism to try to push us in. And when I say they're going to use terrorism, what I mean is they're going to use the threat of terrorism to say we must track all purchases. We must be able to follow every dollar. Otherwise, terrorists will be able to attack. Right. So what are they doing? They're using fear to implement policies of complete and total control, which is what they do. And you're going to see people push back on this because I don't think you have to understand Bitcoin or crypto to understand the government having absolute control of your money is not a good thing, right? And as you mentioned earlier, look, essentially today they do anyway. If they want your account, they can get it. There's no, you're right. There's obstacles, but at the end of the day, you know, they can find a reason. And so the reason that Bitcoin is important is not because Bitcoin users are terrorists, but because Bitcoin users want to control their own financial sovereignty. They don't want the government to be able to, at the drop of a hat, decide for whatever reason that you don't get access to your money anymore. And it could be because you wrote a bad Facebook post about Joe Biden or a tweet that didn't match with the current policy, or I think people inherently understand that and get that, and I think there is going to be massive pushback against this. Now, at the end of the day, does it stop it from happening? I don't know, right? Because the current system seems like it's in an awful lot of trouble, and so they've got to do a couple things, right? They can't go to austerity for political reasons, meaning they can't cut government spending, okay? And they have no will to do that, by the way, either. And so the only option for them is to try to inflate away this debt, right? And they're going to, it's almost unbelievable. But you saw what happened last week with the banks, which, by the way, has gotten extremely quiet this week. You don't see near as much coverage on that out of nowhere, which is kind of a big deal, I would think. But you are starting to see, again, they come out this week with more. The CFTC now is going after Binance, which is another cryptocurrency exchange. So you have the CFTC and the SEC, and they're saying conflicting things, which is interesting. The SEC is alleging that these things are securities, and the CFTC, who controls commodities, is saying that they're commodities, right? And so there's some conflict internally, and it's interesting to watch it play out. At the end of the day, I think it's just more FUD. I think it's at the end of the day, what I think there's going to be a lot of fines. I think this is a money grab. I think this is a way to push an agenda. And on the back end of this, what you have happening is institutions like the Nasdaq and Fidelity offering crypto services to customers. Okay, so is crypto going away? No. Is the FUD cycle in full force? Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, the interesting things that you just articulated. So I'll try to add some. I'll try to be additive. One thing to be additive around is that and if anyone today honestly thinks that regulating crypto or having further oversight and further insight into people's everyday people's transactions, that somehow they're going to uncover the the trail of money back to a terrorist organization. That is, I feel for you if you really think that that's the root issue, or that's the cause here. The What I'm trying to communicate is that, for going back to the 50s, perhaps, the even when cash was king in the US, there still was enough of a trail for people spending, that even in those days, without modern computerization, savvy detectives at the state, local, and federal law enforcement level were still able to trace and understand how bad actors were using cash to commit bad or do bad things. Okay, and the point I'm trying to illustrate is that the it has only gotten easier, not more difficult. It's only gotten easier as our ability to transact has gone electronic, meaning even though the dollars themselves aren't trackable, or they're not natively digital today, or they're not on a blockchain or tracked like that, like a crypto asset is. They're in a system that tracks every movement, and there's final settlement, all that other stuff behind the scenes that we don't know about. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is that the easiest path forward, in order to inflict upon a society these controls, is to say, and to use the veil of, we're protecting people, we're protecting ourselves against terrorist attacks. And the interesting thing that happens there is when someone when a like the president of the ECB, or someone in Congress, or someone in a governing body comes out and says this, now it gives them a certain amount of political cover, because then what happens if we as individuals rise up and say, well, hold on a second, this is overreach, and they can say, well, and it just creates this never ending cycle of distraction and uh, uh, ability for things to happen behind the scenes. And what I'm getting at is that if you are now seen, if you oppose this, and this has happened again and again and again and again throughout history, is if you oppose this, you're now you're saying that you want terrorists to, and this gets spun into this political narrative where you anyway, I think you understand where I'm going with this, and how easy it is to hide behind the cover of, we're trying to protect you against terrorists, or something to that effect.
Well, they can't.
During the COVID.
Yeah, the issue is, though. I mean, if you're going to commit, some sort of crime, people use whatever medium exchange they want, and that doesn't mean you have to ban the medium exchange or overregulate it, right? Because terrorists use dollars to commit attacks, but people also use dollars to buy eggs. Does that mean dollars are bad, right? Like, it doesn't even track correctly. And then the other part of this too is, if you are going to commit some sort of crime, using Bitcoin to do so has to be the absolute dumbest thing you could ever do, because it's pseudo anonymous, right? What that means is every transaction is traceable. If you know the entity's wallet, you can track every transaction they've ever made. So committing crime with Bitcoin or blockchain is very, very stupid, right? And so the best way to do it is with US dollars that are untraceable, right? And so, you know, while they can come out and say, you know, people can use cryptocurrencies for crime, well, people use dollars for crime, right? And so what worries me is the next logical conclusion for them is, well, that's right, then we need to get rid of dollars. And, the government needs to track and control everything, even though 99.99% of individuals are law abiding citizens, right? And have no desire or intent to commit any sort of crime, right? They want to watch and track everything you do. And as a result of that, if that is allowed to happen, people who don't commit crimes will start committing crimes on accident, right? Like because they'll be looking for reasons to go after people, right? And so I just don't I don't think the average person has any problem understanding how this can be negative. And again, back to what we're talking about, this is why decentralization matters, because if you have a decentralized monetary network that anybody all over the world can participate in, that the government cannot slow down or stop, right? That's a very powerful thing for not for committing crimes, but for individual financial sovereignty as a way to protect your wealth and your labors and your time spent working on this earth to provide for your family into the future, right? And to come out and fully attack this on the sole reason of people could commit crimes or it's bad for you know any number of reasons is ridiculous to me.
Yeah, one last thought on this idea of, well, Bitcoin was used by a handful of people globally out of 8 billion to buy some drugs or something like that, and we should outlaw Bitcoin. Well, politicians have have been recorded, and it's well known that politicians have done things that are illegal time and time again. But wait a minute, why haven't the politicians outlawed politicians for
Or
being
banks
for
or banks. HSBC got fined hundreds of millions of dollars for basically facilitating drug cartel money. Like, and they're not talking about banning banks or over. Yeah, it's
right?
just it's very frustrating, right? And so but that's the point, though. That's why again, this is so important that there is no centralized authority to attack and slow down, right? And that's why the everybody worries, and you hear politicians speak about like anonymous shadow coders, right? Like
Oh God.
it's just like but it again, this is freedom technology. This isn't you know criminal technology, right? Any sort of technology that's created will be used by good and bad actors, and there should be some you know as as much as I want to say that I'm a libertarian and I believe in those ideas, there should be some protections, consumer protections, and you know, government oversight of anything involving money. But it should be limited, right? And it should be decided at a state level, not the federal level. And I think mostly the free market should decide, right? Uh, but you're not going to stop bad actors from committing bad acts, right? It just doesn't work that way.
I agree. No, I agree. I agree.
No, it's one last thing I want to point out. These guys, Cooper and Kirk, these guys were involved in Operation Choke Point 1.0, and this is an article they published, or I shouldn't say an article. This is more of a paper they published on the federal bank regulators come for crypto. And so the reason I want to point this out is because it's one thing for the crypto community to come out and say, hey, we're under attack, but these guys aren't necessarily the crypto community. And this is something that's important. What they conclude is the regulatory overreach against the crypto industry is illegal for much of the same reasons as its predecessor, meaning Choke Point 1.0. And so what they're doing, and I think everybody should read this to try to understand what's going on. But I mean, the reason it's important to understand this is because this is real. This is happening. You have the United States factions of the United States government operating, against an industry somewhat behind the scenes and not in a good faith manner. And so these people in these factions of the government work for us, right? That's the deal that we have as Americans. And what's happening now is in an effort to consolidate power in each individual government agency, they're each taking different approaches to try to, basically attack the industry. And I think what we'll find, much like what the administration has done in other aspects of, their policy, they do something, they know it's not constitutional, they know it's not necessarily legal, but they do it anyway because they know that they'll be able to get away with it for X period of time before the courts come in and say, hey, look, this is illegal. And so that's why We believe this is just FUD against the industry, and that Bitcoin and crypto aren't going anywhere. They can do this all they want, but again, you live in a country that has laws and protections against the people that work for us, right? And what will happen in this is you'll find, I think, over time, that these actions committed against this industry aren't constitutional, they aren't legal. There's a difference between what they're doing and good faith, right? And we can have discussions around crypto and Bitcoin and its role in the US economy. And we can make smart regulations. We can protect consumers and investors in a reasonable, intelligent way, and not this backdoor, unconstitutional, illegal manner that they're pursuing now. And over time, the courts will prove that. And so I think you have to keep that in mind as you watch all this stuff play out. And also keep in mind you have, like I said earlier, Fidelity is going to offer crypto products. NASDAQ's going to offer crypto products. So this is basically a FUD cycle in which they want to scare people away from these assets. And as somebody who's been involved in this for 6 years, this isn't new. We've seen different iterations of this, albeit that this cycle is extremely prescient because you've got a lot of other things happening in the background. All of this is happening at the same time. You have major banks failing. You have the Federal Reserve raising interest rates in a manner they've never done before. You've got trillions of dollars of debt. You've got the government running up against the position to where they're, in a few years, they're not going to be able to service the debt because of the interest rate hikes. And so you've got all that playing on at the same time. And it's important to remember, and this is, again, I'll go back to why decentralization is so important, because in the face of all this, Bitcoin is operating at 100% uptime. It's got tens of thousands of nodes operating all over the world. So even though the United States is being very aggressive right now, it doesn't matter. There's people spinning up nodes all over the world. This is a global phenomenon. What's happening here, while somewhat relevant to the rest of the world, is basically irrelevant to the general Bitcoin and crypto industry, right? If the United States wants to chase innovation and jobs and potential tax revenue out of the country, I think it's a mistake, and I think it's foolhardy, because this technology is code. And I always say this, it's like the wind, right? You can't stop the wind. And what they're doing right now is they're trying to build walls to stop the wind. What we should be doing is building sails to harness it. And you're starting to see other countries do that. Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong. These people are embracing this technology, and they're going to reap the benefits. And this administration is making a very bad mistake, in my opinion, right? And so we're going to see how all this plays out. But what do you do in the face of this? I continue to buy Bitcoin. Every time I see something like this, it just makes me want to buy it more, because it shows you're on the right path. Because the people in the current administration do not have the best interest of the American people in mind. And they've proven that over and over and over again. Like, this isn't something that, like, I'm saying it's like, oh God, Josh is, he's a crazy right-wing conspiracy theory. That's not even true. All you have to do is look at what they've done, right, and what they're continuing to do. So, I think it's important for people to understand that this is actually happening. The government is attacking this industry. Ultimately, because it's Bitcoin specifically is decentralized in nature, there's not a lot they can do, and in fact, they should embrace it, in my opinion. But I wanted to point that out because I think it is important for people to understand.
No, it is very important. I think the things that matter more than anything else or things to remember. We still have the power in this country to swap the administration every 4 years, the federal level, presidential level. We every 2 years we have our congressional, like, we're rotating senators and congress peoples out and new ones in. So from one day to the next, it feels like Armageddon at times. I'm not going to lie. However, the things that we have, or the things that the things that facilitated the creation of Bitcoin, like banking crisis, financial crisis, uh, central banks debasing money, debasing our money that we have to work for. They don't have to work for it, but we do. and the fruits of our labor are becoming less and less. Uh, there's less and less yield from the fruit of our labor, and what I mean is we're trading, in mass. We're trading our labor for currency. But the thing that is most challenging, that it keeps me up at night, is that the currency is not the right unit to store the purchasing power. That is a lesson that I've had to learn. It's a very hard lesson that I've had to learn, and it's a very tough lesson for a lot of people, in my opinion. But I think what happens is once you understand that the current unit that we transact in today, which is our US dollar or the euro or the yen, when you understand that it is the currency is intended for transacting. It's not necessarily intended, or at least as I see this, it's not intended to be the mechanism to hold the value. And the reason, and for all the obvious, or for all the reasons that should be obvious, and if they're not obvious, I'm encouraging people to learn a little bit more about what currency actually is. And the point I'm trying to get to is that every day of the week, every day of the year, the Fed, the central bank of the United States, are printing more dollars to service the debt, to do other things, to facilitate government spending, to bail out banks, to put backstops in place, to make interest payments. I mean, our tax revenues in this country are not even close. And but that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that when you have an awakening, one mind at a time and one Bitcoin wallet at a time, is you understand that you take the raw energy in the form of purchasing power that is slowly being eroded, like the ice cube melting. If you continue to leave it in U.S. dollars or other fiat money or currency, I should say, I shouldn't even call it money. That's a bit of a misnomer, in my opinion. But once you learn that all of these other enormous forces, galactic in nature, like central banks around the world enacting monetary policy, debasing fiat money, continuing to print, continuing to bail out, and you realize that that's the wrong unit to store your wealth, then then you start to have your own individual awakening where you're like, okay, what do I do about it? And Raoul Paul is a great resource for understanding what to do. Meaning we can't change any of these things as individuals. It's global. But there are some silver linings, and the silver linings are there are assets that you can trade your fiat money for to hold in the short term, medium term, long term, that give you a fighting chance at keeping up and being protected against the bottom line debasement of fiat money. That's
Yeah, no, and I think
that's
again, it's important to understand why that this is happening and why it's important to have these assets to protect yourself against this. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So we talked about today, Operation Choke Point 2.0, that the government and that actions in the government are indeed attacking the industry, and why decentralization is important, and storing your efforts of your labor in a decentralized, trustless asset like Bitcoin. So that's where I want to leave it today. Ted, do you have any other things to say before we wrap it up?
uh, other than do your own research, become a student of money, become a student of Bitcoin, and then become a student of what it means to harness the power of assets to protect your purchasing power from today forward.
Love it. That's great. Nope, I think everybody should do that. That's great advice. All right, we'll wrap it up there. As always, I know this is financial advice. Please do your own research, like Ted said. Everything we talk about is just opinions. We're not financial experts. We're not lawyers. We are just two guys that love the Bitcoin and crypto industry and want to help other people learn about it and